Hi, folks. My name is Ken Riaf. I'm here with Jay McLauchlan, and we're here courtesy of the 400 Series Project stories, and we're here today to talk about the author, Jonathan Bayliss, who lived in Gloucester and who wrote here, born in 1926 in Arlington, but spent a good portion of his life here, and I'd like to introduce Jay. Welcome.
Thank you, Ken.
And I'm hoping that we could have a couple minutes so you could tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll talk about your relationship with John and how it formed over the years and some of the things that you came to know about him over that time.
Well, I grew up in a suburb of New Bedford, another fish town, and went to when I started working, I went to Interlake Iron Corporation in South Chicago and was part of a rigging repair gang there, blast furnace plant and coke plant. And I had that experience in 1951 and 52, and then I was drafted into the Army. I was in the infantry and went to infantry OCS, and I served during the Korean War in the United States, luckily, because it was an airborne division, and they kept us in reserve. After my Army service, I could go on the GI Bill to any place, any college that I wanted to, and so I picked the University of California at Berkeley. My major was physiological psychology, but you need a doctorate to do anything in that. So I was more interested in sculpture and design and got an equivalent degree in that. When I went to work in that field, I came to New Hampshire because I had a connection with the League of Arts and Crafts director there. And I worked there for 5 years and had my own studio workshop, but I also did some teaching there. Because of a divorce, I had to leave New Hampshire because we used desertion as the cause. They didn't have no fault. And I could go anywhere I wanted to. I picked Gloucester because when I came to Gloucester, it just struck me as an absolutely unique place that it is. And I was driving in East Gloucester and I saw a sign, Beacon Marine Basin, studio for space for rent and an apartment for rent. Well, it was wonderful because my next door neighbor was Peter Anastas, and that's the lead into how I met Jonathan.
Right.
And my profession is a woodworker, sculptor, and I've designed many furniture and especially complicated staircase systems.
But it turns out, I mean, it's where John went to school at Berkeley, but you didn't know that at the time. How did you first encounter John?
Well, I didn't know him at Berkeley. He was a graduate student and teaching, and I met him through Peter Anastas. Peter would visit my shop frequently, and he got to know me a little bit and knew that I went to Berkeley, and he said, "Hey, I want you to meet Jonathan Bayliss because he was there also." So Jonathan was invited over, and we hit it off. It was amazing. We talked about both of us had listened to the Linus Pauling, Edward Teller debate in 1958. We remembered both staying up till 2:45 to see if the Russians, when they shot a rocket to the moon, they were the first to hit the moon. And the rumor was that they were going to set off a small atomic explosion so that everybody could see what they've done. everyone stayed up to watch it to see if it happened, and it didn't, of course, luckily. But anyway, we shared these things, and also the fact that I had gotten to know Rethrox and Patchen and Ferlinghetti when I was at Berkeley, and that we had that beat literature in common. And fortunately for me, Jonathan invited me to attend many evenings with Charles Olson, Peter, and myself at Jonathan's house. That was absolutely fascinating. Olson was boisterous and emphatic and powerfully disagreeing with the community redevelopment, what was happening to the waterfront, old houses being torn down and replaced with bad architecture. Charles had worked for the Roosevelt administration and was even asked to be Postmaster General, interestingly enough.
I was just going to interrupt just to say, so this grouping, Olson, Anastas, yourself, and John Bayliss, how did John what was his, how did he fit in? What was his superpower in that group?
Well, it was interesting. He was bemused. It was interesting that he had punch cards that hadn't been punched, but punch cards that he would take notes on, and he would listen to what Peter had to say, listen to what Charles had to say, and then in different places summarize in a constructive way about what possible actions could be taken, not just complaints, but what actions can be taken to make things better. This was always on his mind. How can we improve things?
I was just going to interrupt to say for anybody in our audience who's under 50, doesn't know what a punch card is.
Well, that was an early computer, method of putting in information into an early computer.
Programming, yeah.
And programming it and then taking the information out.
And so we'll talk about how Jonathan comes to have those with him, because John and computers turns out to be a story we can talk about a little bit. But so he would be in these meetings, these gatherings, they're just informal, and he'd be taking notes on these computer punch cards.
Yeah, and it was not just serious talk. We did a lot of drinking. We drank a bottle of scotch at every meeting, it was very cheerful and rather boisterous. Well, I didn't have an awful lot to say, except my end of it was to sort of thinking of how do you concretize this? How do you put this into some kind of action that might change things? And that was my small contribution.
But I mean, were people talking in they're talking in more theoretical, philosophical ways?
Oh, yeah. Talking about writing, talking about civic goings-on, talking about the Democratic Party, talking about what's happening in the city, and it was great fun, and it was a great honor for me to be there. I consider Jonathan a polymath, not only in the sense of his expertise on so many things, but also his interest in mathematics, and that comes out in all of his writing. And one of the most obvious things, I brought a little thing with me, was his interest in Gilgamesh. In a
what do we have there?
Well, this is a ISO an isorectotetrahedron, and that means that it's got 3 right angles that you can see here, and they are the corner of a square cut off, and it makes a equilateral triangle on the bottom, and these are isosceles triangles. That's where you get iso, and it's a 4-sided figure, which is a tetrahedron, and Jonathan calls it an ISTH, and that if you spell it and make it lingual, it's earth, which is interesting enough. And this was used in Gilgamesh, not as an omelet. It was hung like this on a thong, but not as an amulet, but as a symbol of power, a symbol of the most perfect mixture of opinions, of different influences, of culture, of challenges that Gilgamesh faced when in his story and in Jonathan's 2 plays, The Tower of Gilgamesh, and that has been performed several times, but it was an example of his math. And he was interested in my use of math in my work. I showed him how I could take 2 points and on a big piece of plywood or glued up tabletop and take a string around those points and make a perfect oval very quickly and very perfectly. Another example was the dimensions of a golden rectangle.
The golden mean.
Golden mean, where this side is to this side as the addition of these 2 is to the next one, so that it just could continue around. I'm not describing it terribly well, but I showed him how if you take that angle, which is 36 degrees, then you don't have to go through the calculations. You can make it all very simply any size you want. So we shared that. We went back and forth with our math, and of course, his fascinating thing is with his math is what he did for Gorton's.
So just to stop for a second, I mean, while he was writing, he was also working at Gorton's, and can you give us a sense of what his function was there and how that ties into his writing on economics and on...
Yeah, well, go back a little bit. His experience was Navy during the end of World War II, 2 years, and then he worked in a couple of different jobs and had his teaching experience in Berkeley. Then when he came to Gloucester, he had enough experience with computers from his Berkeley experience to realize that they had, I would say, some confusion and slow operation that could be corrected by his expertise in setting up a computer. So they ordered he convinced them that they ought to pay the expense, and they got an IBM 360.
But I'm just to stop you for a second. I mean, today computers are, they're ubiquitous. What year are we talking about, and how were computers viewed back in that time period?
Well, it was a huge machine. I remember when it first came in to Gorton's, Jonathan invited me over to look at it, and it was gigantic, and what they the way they used it was to develop a matrix of information. Now, this matrix of information is a whole series of demand, supply, transportation, cost of all different variables, and this whole string of what goes on in the process of making their Gorton's product, the fish product. And that by using a computer, everything became practically instantaneous.
This is what we would call maybe like supply chain and things of that nature.
Absolutely.
But I mean, John was, and I'm just suggesting that he was bringing the computer in to help make decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and instead of sort of arbitrary decisions, it was backed up by science. He called it the scientific method of design coordination, and he actually wrote a very serious paper about that, which was used by IBM worldwide. But at the same time, Gorton's was undergoing a very interesting rebuild of their office. And he actually asked me if I was interested in doing a conference table and some other furniture. And I said, sure, and I made a presentation, and the conference table was in the shape of the McManus vessel, the Adventure, with but cut off in the bow and stern. But it had that curvature of a schooner, because that was a terrific way to make the history of the fishing industry. So anyway, he said, how long would it take? Not interested in how much it would cost. How long would it take? I said 6 months. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, we're looking at 6 weeks. So I didn't get to do that. But I saw what Jonathan went through in his, he actually worked with the architect and did the designs and made the entire thing work, even with a recalcitrant general contractor. But it was very interesting to see that.
So I just want to pause for a second here, because I want to talk a little bit about Jonathan's work history,
Yeah.
but I also want to leave some time for us to talk about some of the things he wrote and what they meant, what he was trying to tell us.
Yes.
So he was at Gorton's, but he also served as the treasurer for the city of Gloucester.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you relate to him with regard to his employment there?
Well, he also brought computerization to City
City
Hall.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But it was a time when the mayor wasn't always in agreement with the council. This is it can be a problem, and Jonathan made that kind of made things happier than they were. He was advisor to the mayor as well as treasurer, and he did a huge amount for the city of Gloucester.
Yeah, and so again, bringing together this new technology and putting it to work in business and in government, and also writing these books at the same time. So how did you interact with him when it came to the things that he was writing about and the things that he wanted to convey about his experiences?
I have to say that I wasn't part of that. Peter was. Charles certainly was, but I really was not part of, and I had no input into it, except that I appreciated the fun that he had. I appreciated his objectivity. I appreciated his complexity a great deal, but I had no really no association with that,
But since
except just to enjoy it.
just to enjoy it. And so tell me what it is that makes it enjoyable, and what it was about those, the books, the Gloucester book, the Gloucester Tide, Gloucester Moss, Prologos. What was it about those that captured your interest? And
Well, first of all, the fun of deciphering who was who. He would make up names that had that were related symbolically to what he was to the very real people, but made them anonymous by using a different name. Gloucester Mass is my favorite of the books because it was sort of a summary in a way, and it was it had a lot of the Gilgamesh in it. Catherine put on a reading of one of the panels, and I was Ingenu in it. Ingenu was the name of his dog after Ibi Rex, and Jonathan used to come by when I was building my house in East Gloucester with his dog and see what I was up to and tell me what he was up to also, and we had many nice visits that way, and he loved his animals. And he had a cat. I remember he had a cat that he had a 25-foot ramp that went up to the roof of his house so the cat could go up there and enjoy sitting up on the roof. He was great with animals.
so we just have a few minutes left, but I just want the audience, if possible, if you could explain to them why these books are important and why they, why they talk to us, and maybe what it is that can be gained from taking a shot at these books. These are not easy books to read.
No.
So they're quite challenging.
Yeah.
And so how did you meet that challenge? I mean, you sort of have to keep going, as it were.
Yeah, and you have to keep a dictionary close by, a good one. And I think that the relationship between people and the kindness that people show to one another and the effort that can be made to improve people's lives, to improve the workings of everything that's touched. It's like the power of this little object. You gotta keep going. You've got to keep asking the right questions. We have to go in the right direction. And there were a lot of things. There are things that are decried in it. Certainly, the Republican attitude. Certainly, the corruption of business power is decried, and there are substitutes that Jonathan makes that are elevating, are possible solutions that change things. And when back in the 50s at Berkeley, all we talked about were change agents and how you can be a good one, and
it seems to be coming back now.
it sure does. It's exactly what it. So his books speak very much to what the world is going on. He was an environmentalist before environmentalism became something that was so important to us. He made these things happen, and I just it's well worth somebody that doesn't know his writing to go ahead, start with start with Gloucester.
Gloucester book. Gloucester.
Gloucester's book, yeah.
Yeah.
Start with that.
Yeah.
And read Gilgamesh, because that's fascinating.
I just have, I mean, we just have a few minutes left, so I just wanted to say I did have the opportunity to write a little essay telling a story of, encountering John on different occasions.
Yes.
I had some interactions with him, and the one that I wrote about, and maybe you have some story you can tell also in the brief time we have remaining, was going over to his house. This is shortly before he passed away,
Yeah.
and trying to do a filming with Henry Farini for the Polises, this documentary about Charles Olson. And of course, because he was in that milieu with Olson, we wanted to get his thoughts about the poet. And but here it was, we set up our equipment, and we started to film, asking John if he could recollect some of his experiences. And he wouldn't do it because he knew that his memory wasn't serving him well at that point in time, and that instead of trying to recollect things that were difficult to recollect, he rather not do it at all, because he didn't want to give that false impressions or sort of a misunderstood recall. So it was very interesting for someone like himself to have the presence of mind to know not only what they knew, but what they'd forgotten.
Yeah.
And that by retelling a story in fragments that were not easily connected, that it wasn't serving any purpose. So he demurred, and it turns out that that probably was a good thing. And I think John had a great sense of his self, where he stood at various points in his life. Did you have any experiences with him?
Well, I certainly share that. I'm 89, and I find that happening all the time, although I'm still working hard. But it was I just gotta say that with Jonathan's Navy experience, with his teaching experience, with his business acumen, with his relationship with his family, his relationship with his friends, that all of that put together, he made an incredible contribution to the betterment of Gloucester and the betterment of the world, really. And that's the power of his writings, is that successful endeavor.
Well, thank you. I think that's a good place actually to end on. And if we can, let's do that. And I want to thank you again for sharing those experiences. And I hope and encourage folks to pick up one of these books at some point and go for it. Yeah?
Terrific. Thank you so much, Kenny.
Thanks, Jay.
It was wonderful.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks, folks.